Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. In this episode we're going to be looking at one of the smallest models I've ever worked on in 00 gauge. So small it fits in the palm of your hand. It's a Hornby Terrier locomotive, one of the original terriers that was based on the dapole tooling. Now, given it a battery test, it's not the best of health, it's not willing to run, it's just so intermittent. You have to keep pushing it along, and I think that's the fact that the wheels are heavily oxidised on this model, and I honestly don't know when the last time this model ran, as I picked this up second hand from the local model shop. So having a look at this, I'm going to start disassembling it, and to disassemble the body shell you need to take off this screw here, third from the front. This holds the front of the body shell in place, and also the one under the cab. There are a multitude of screws underneath this model, but these are the two you need to remove if you want to disengage the chassis from the body shell. And once that's done, you can see it's that little, is it a Type 5 or Type 7 motor in there? Fair bit of wiring for such a small model. And this is the body shell. Now I've undone the other two screws that hold the cab in place. This is screwed in place and also clipped in because I intend to DCC fit this model. And I am looking for somewhere to fit a chip. Now I know it is possible because I've seen other people have done this, but space is at a real premium in this model. So I've got one of the smallest decoders I could find, which is a Hornby one, and I'm not keen on using Hornby decoders, they're not the best, but have to make do with what I've got. And just unclipping the cab, I find this weight in the bunker and think, well, that could be a good place for a decoder, and run the wires across the cab floor. But even that's proving to be a little bit too tight for this decoder. So I'm going to have a think, and we'll come back to that shortly. So looking at the chassis, it's a very simple design. Plunger pickups on the wheel backs, but there's a wire from each of the pickups. Now what I'm going to do is disassemble it, and I'm going to link all those together. So removing the other screws from the base plate allows the keeper plate to come off and give you access to the wheels. They don't sit in any sort of proper bearings, they are just sitting in the chassis, which is a shame. And you can see there that the wheels are almost black with muck and oxidisation, so they're going to need a good clean. As are these plunger pickups, although all 6 are working, none of them are stuck, which is good. And like I said, there's a multitude of different coloured wires all going to this, the pickups and the motor back. So I'm going to cut all that off and strip out the old wiring because I want to DCC fit this. I'm also going to remove this motor retaining bracket at the front here because I want to take the motor out just to thoroughly clean the chassis, as there's a little bit of dry lubrication and fluff and dirt all over it. So if I just move these wires, that motor lifts out from the front and disengages from the bracket at the back once the front motor mount has been unscrewed and removed. So we'll just get that away there and put that to one side. That needs cleaning, there's a fair bit of old grease on that. And then, like I said, if you gently pull the motor up, there we go, it's disengaged from that mount. And you can see on that worm gear and drive cog there, the old grease has gone an orangey, almost an earwaxy type substance, so it's not going to do the model any good. It needs to be a lot thinner than that to lubricate properly. So I'm just having a look round. There's a little bit of cleaning up to do and a bit of old grease to remove, but it's not too bad overall. Now I've just noticed, I'll digress a bit here, I've just noticed that the smoke box door is a separate part on this model, so just prising it off gently with the blunt scalpel blade, I find another weight, but there's a lot more room in the smoke box for a decoder. So unscrewing this little screw here will release that weight. And there is indeed a fair bit of room in there. However, I do realise I'm lightening an already light model, which isn't ideal to be honest, but with this model needs must. But wherever I put a decoder in this model, I think I'm going to have to sacrifice some of the weight. So now, using my pair of side snips, I'm just going to cut these wires off the top of the motor and the capacitor. It's debatable whether these capacitors actually do anything now with the advent of digital television signals, but I'm going to remove this one because I fit a decoder to it and they have the suppression built into the decoder anyway. So testing the motor with the battery, it proves to be a nice strong runner. So now what I'm going to do is, with the motor aside, I'm going to desolder all this original Hornby wire. There's 3 obviously separate tabs that are all insulated from each other. And I've cut some wire and tinned the end. And what I'm going to do is create a jumper cable between each one and just have 1 wire to the decoder instead of 3. So just touching it on the solder tab there. I just replaced it's a lot thinner than the Hornby wire, so it's a bit more flexible, and I don't see the point in having 3 separate wires when you can link all of the pickups together on each side to simplify the wiring a little bit. So once that's all done, and you'll see now when I try and attach this, that other one pings off, dink. So I had to do that again, but after some careful soldering I managed to link all 3 pickups on each side. I've used purple wire for one side and green on the other, and now I'm going to just give the chassis block a bit of a clean up with a cotton bud of mess. I should have done this before soldering really, but it doesn't matter because it's all nice and securely in place. So I'm just working through the hole in the chassis there where the drive gears go, removing all that old grease and oil, and then I'm also going to give the chassis sides and pickups a good clean. They're very springy. None of these are stuck. Sometimes with plunger pickups you run the risk of getting stuck. If they get congealed with old oil and dirt, they can stick in and prove to be quite useless at picking up electricity. But once it's all clean, and I'm satisfied that it's clean, I've found this clear washer on the desk. Now I'm not entirely sure where it comes from. I think it might be off this motor mount, which is the last thing I took off the chassis. But I'm going to have to do some investigation in a moment and find out where that went. The motor mount itself has got a coating of this old white orangey grease all over it that was applied at the factory when this model was made. And then once that's clean, I'm going to clean this main idler gear, part of the drive train. This was also covered in old grease, and then I'm going to just temporarily refit the wheels because I can't remember what way round that idler gear goes, and it turns out I'd got it in the wrong way. So it's a good job I checked. It goes in that way round, and now I've confirmed that, I'm going to add a small amount of oil because obviously that spins around at quite high revolution, so it'll need some lubrication as there's no proper bearings on it. Now I found out where the clear washer went, and it's not a very clear picture, but it goes on the screw underneath the motor mount as I thought, and it just levels the motor mount up. Without that washer the motor mount does not sit level. So that was screwed back into place, and that also holds that idler gear in place. And then I put the motor back in. Now I didn't take a note of which way it came out, which was a bit daft really, but it doesn't really matter with DCC because if you do wire it up so it runs backwards, on DCC at least you can adjust the CVs on the decoder to make it run the correct way. It's more of an issue on DC, to be honest, but that was an oversight on my part. I'm just putting some Labelle 106 grease on the worm gear there and turning it by hand to spread it across onto that idler gear, and now I'm going to turn my attention to these grubby wheels. Now these really were, I don't know if it was dirt or oxidization or a mixture of both, but you'll see shortly when I've worked the magic with the fiberglass pencil on these and brought them back that they actually do shine. Unfortunately, they are these horrible brass type wheels that Hornby had a phase of using, and you do find that the brass type wheels which aren't plated do collect dirt quicker than the other ones. But you can see there just how shiny they came up, and that is all the old fibres, so we'll get rid of that. Don't want them in my fingers. And now I've refitted the motor and the wheels are all good to go. Just get that bit of fluff off there. I'm going to put the wheels back into the bottom of the chassis here. I'm just going to clean that springy piece there that keeps the wheel, the centre wheel, in contact with the rail. I'm just going to bend it up slightly as well with the screwdriver because it had been flattened over years of use. It should stick up slightly like that. Once the wheels are in place, ensuring that the plunger pickups are behind the wheel backs, I'm going to add a small amount of oil to the axles. Again, the metal in metal with no bearings. There needs to be some lubrication, otherwise they will wear. And the lubrication just helps with the smoother running. So I'm just adding a few small drops from this pin dropper. And then the base keeper plate was given a clean up. This also had some of that horrible yellowy orangey grease all over it. So I'm just going to use a cotton bud and meths as usual to clean all that away. Especially in this hole here where the gear sits. And then that was put back on, and then one of the many screws was put back in. For such a small model, there is an unusually large amount of screws holding this all together. Probably a little bit over-engineered, but it works. It's just a lot of them. So once the I'm just checking there to make sure I don't put it in the wrong place, because obviously 2 of those screw holes are for body securing. So once the base keeper plate has been screwed back on, I give the motor a test direct from the battery. This proves that the wheels are free running, they're not catching on anything, the gears are working properly, and it's spreading the lubrication through the drivetrain. And before I fit the decoder, I've temporarily soldered the pickup wires to the motor now, and I'm going to test each of the pickups to make sure they're working. And they are, and for some reason I test the front one and the middle one, and then I go back to the front one and don't test that rear pickup, but it does work. I don't know why I did that, but it does work. So now I'm going to desolder those 2 wires again, and I'm going to look at fitting the decoder. Now, the easiest way I found of doing this, now again it's very simple DCC fitting. Red and black decoder wires to pick up orange and grey to the motor terminals, and you can see here that I've fitted the decoder already. And now I'm going to test all the pickups again to make sure that nothing's come loose, and this time I do test all of them, although that middle one is slightly intermittent. It wouldn't sit on the battery correctly, but it's all working, which is good. And then we are going to look at the body shell. This just needed a dusting over. It was very dusty. Few hairs and that on it, but overall in generally very good condition. And I do think this southern olive green livery suits these terriers rather well. It's a nice livery, this southern railway colours. So I've decided not to fit the decoder into the bunker, so I'm going to replace the weight and then clip the cab back on and then secure it with the yet more screws that hold it in place. And we've gone back a step now. I've taken the decoder off again, and I'm actually going to fit it in the smoke box. So I took the smoke box door off and removed the weight. But because of the tightness of space, I actually put the decoder in and then soldered the wires together, because I couldn't get the decoder in with the motor in the way. The decoder had to be in first, and to limit the amount of wires, I cut them as short as possible. And then off camera soldered them back to where they were before. Now I couldn't do it with the camera stand in the way. I had to concentrate. I didn't want to melt the body shell or the plastic bits on the chassis, so I didn't actually film that. But you can see there the wires, red and black to track, and the orange and grey motor wires there sticking out. They was all soldered to the correct terminals after I had split them up. And I thought there was no need in this model actually for any heat shrink, because the solder tabs are well away from each other, so there's very little risk of short circuit. But once the decoder's in the smoke box, it is actually a very nice fit, and it's negligible the amount of weight I've actually lost. And you can see there the wiring all stuffed in the smoke box door there. And then the smoke box door, I'm just pushing that back slightly. The smoke box door is then put back in place, and this is a very tight friction fit. There's no need for any adhesive at all on this. It just pushes home and holds very firm. So the next thing, one of the last jobs, is to fit the couplings, put these back on. And you will notice when it's running that the front coupling wasn't seated correctly, but I do rectify this. But you will see it shortly, it droops down slightly because I hadn't put the screw in correctly. Now underneath, looking at the underside of the model, the plunger pickups, to aid electrical conductivity, I just put a small amount of that Pico power lube on them, which is conductive lubricant. And the model with the less weight, now there is a gap between the tank side and the motor. You can't really see it here, but I've tried to highlight it. And each side of the motor there is a small slither of lead. So the model is actually heavier now than it was when I started. And as you can see here, now it's been fully reassembled. It's a beautiful runner, and it actually really does look quite nice, even for a tooling that dates back to the Dapol factory in the late 80s, early 90s. For my use as this on my preserved garden railway, it's absolutely fabulous. There's no need for the bells and whistles of the newer model, although the newer Terrier that Hornby released is an absolutely fantastic model. But this will suffice. I really do like these little Terriers. An engine that will fit in the palm of your hand. And it was a challenge to DCC fit this, but I do actually have a smaller model to do in the shape of a Hornby Pug, but that will come up in a future episode of Trash to Track when I get round to it. If you've got an engine you'd like to see featured on an episode of Trash to Track, please do get in touch at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. Have a look and get it sent over, and who knows, it may even feature in an episode all of its own. I'll leave you now with some shots of the Terrier running in the beautiful weather we had in the garden, hauling a typical rake of 3 Mark 1s for a preserved line. Thank you so much for watching Trash to Track. Please like, share and subscribe. And I will catch you all again in the next video. Bye for now.